Harlem, New York, 2:43 p.m. Thursday, September 15th, 1955. The autumn heat clings to Lenox Avenue like a wet wool coat, thick with the smell of exhaust fumes, fried fish, and the sweat of a neighborhood that never stops moving. Outside the Red Rooster, Bumpy Johnson's 1954 Cadillac Eldorado sits parked with mathematical precision, exactly 18 inches from the curb, well within legal limits. The car is obsidian black, chrome polished to mirror brightness, white wall tires that cost more than most Harlem families see in 6 months. It is not transportation. It is a statement written in steel and leather. Officer Michael Mickey Torino approaches the vehicle with the swagger of a man who believes his badge grants him dominion over every street corner in Manhattan. 29 years old, Brooklyn-born Irish, third-generation Night PD. He has been working the Harlem beat for 8 months, and in those 8 months, he has made it his personal crusade to remind every black businessman, every numbers runner, every street hustler exactly who owns these streets according to the law. He sees the Cadillac and sees an opportunity to humiliate a king in his own kingdom. Bumpy emerges from the restaurant just as Torino begins writing the citation. Charcoal gray suit pressed to perfection, fedora casting a clean shadow over eyes that have seen 30 years of Harlem politics. He approaches without urgency, his Italian leather shoes clicking against concrete with the rhythm of a funeral march. No raised voice, no visible anger, just the terrifying calm of a predator that has already calculated every move in a game his opponent doesn't know they're playing. "That's my vehicle, officer," Bumpy states, his voice carrying the temperature of January wind. Torino looks up, recognizes exactly who he's dealing with, and grins. Not a friendly grin. The grin of a man who believes his uniform makes him bulletproof against consequences. Vehicles illegally parked, getting towed. He signals the waiting tow truck with theatrical enthusiasm. The registration isn't expired. The parking is legal. Bumpy knows this. Torino knows this. The crowd gathering on the sidewalk knows this. But Torino also knows that in 1955, a black man's word, even Bumpy Johnson's word, carries less weight than a white officer's badge in any courtroom in New York City. "You know who I am?" Bumpy asks, his voice barely above a whisper. Torino steps closer, close enough that his breath hits Bumpy's face when he speaks. "I know exactly who you are, boy. That's why I'm enjoying this so much." The chains hook to the Cadillac's bumper with the sound of metal biting metal. Bumpy watches his car rise onto the flatbed, expression carved from granite. When the tow truck pulls away, Torino walks past him, shoulder brushing shoulder. "Welcome to my Harlem," the officer whispers. Bumpy says nothing. He simply removes a small leather notebook from his breast pocket, writes down badge number 847, and closes the book with a snap that sounds like a coffin lid slamming shut. Within 72 hours, Officer Michael Torino will lose his badge, his pension, his marriage, and his ability to walk any street in New York without looking over his shoulder. The story of how Mickey Torino lost everything is a warning that history has tried to hide. If you enjoy these deep dives into the underworld, you can support the channel by buying me a coffee using the link in the description. Your support keeps these investigations alive. Now, let's go back to September 15th, 1955. By September 1955, Ellsworth Johnson operated Harlem through an invisible grid of power lines that bypassed every official channel in New York City. The newspapers reduced him to a numbers racketeer, which was accurate but incomplete, like calling electricity dangerous without understanding the grid that powers entire cities. Bumpy's real authority existed in the systematic cultivation of debt and dependency among the men who officially controlled Manhattan. He was not just a criminal operator. He was a shadow mayor whose influence reached directly into the machinery of legitimate government. 3 judges in Manhattan criminal court received monthly envelopes containing cash amounts that precisely matched their mortgage payments. Alderman Robert Hayes owed his election to Bumpy's ability to deliver 4,000 votes in a single district through a network of barbershops, churches, and union halls. Union boss Anthony Castellano's nephew walked free from an assault charge because Bumpy provided an alibi witness who happened to be a Catholic priest. Detective Raymond Cole in Internal Affairs carried Bumpy's number in his wallet, not from friendship, but from survival, his gambling debts erased twice in exchange for advance warnings about raids and investigations. At the center of this intelligence operation sat Marcus Williams, known in certain circles as the Ledger. Former accountant expelled for creative arithmetic, he specialized in financial archaeology, excavating secrets buried in bank statements, property records, and shell corporations. Marcus could trace a single dollar from a church collection plate to a politician's pocket in under 4 hours. When Bumpy needed to know where money originated or where it disappeared, Marcus provided answers with mathematical precision. Officer Michael Torino represented everything this system was designed to neutralize. Brooklyn Irish, third-generation cop, 29 years old with the kind of generational resentment that made badges dangerous weapons. His grandfather broke union strikes. His father controlled garment district enforcement. Mickey inherited their belief that the badge granted divine authority over streets, businesses, and the people who operated within their jurisdiction. For 8 months, he had been conducting systematic extraction throughout Harlem, demanding weekly payments from 12 black-owned establishments to prevent raids that never materialized, and citations for violations that did not exist. The fatal flaw in Torino's operation was not the corruption itself. Harlem had survived corrupt cops since police departments existed. His mistake was operating in Bumpy Johnson's territory, without permission, without tribute, without acknowledging the established order that kept neighborhoods functioning. He was taxing businesses under Bumpy's protection while keeping 100% of the profit, violating the fundamental economics of organized power. Bumpy maintained control through proportional response, not random violence. A shopkeeper who paid Bumpy's numbers operation understood that payment bought protection from exactly the kind of systematic harassment Torino was conducting. Every dollar Torino extracted represented a failure of Bumpy's authority to protect his people. That made it structural damage requiring surgical repair. At 3:15 that afternoon, exactly 30 minutes after watching his Cadillac disappear, Bumpy stepped into the Red Rooster's back office and made a single phone call. Marcus Williams answered on the second ring. Officer Michael Torino, badge 847, 32nd Precinct. Find everything. Start with the money. By 9:43 that evening, Marcus sat in his basement office reviewing financial records that revealed Officer Torino had been living far beyond his legitimate salary for 7 consecutive months. Cash deposits appeared every Friday like clockwork, totaling thousands of dollars. But the mathematics revealed something unexpected. Someone else was already paying Michael Torino, and it was not Bumpy Johnson. Marcus Williams operated from a basement office that resembled a war room more than an accounting firm. 3 filing cabinets lined the walls, each drawer labeled with the kind of precision that turned financial chaos into surgical evidence. By dawn Friday, he had reduced Officer Torino's illegal empire to a series of numbers that told a story no courtroom could ignore. The mathematics were brutal and undeniable. 12 black-owned businesses along Lenox Avenue had been systematically converted into tributaries, feeding a corrupt officer's personal treasury. At 4:22 that afternoon, Marcus photographed bank statements revealing cash deposits every Friday that bore no relationship to Torino's official NYPD paycheck. The pattern was amateur but consistent. Different amounts, always under federal reporting thresholds, deposited with the regularity of a legitimate payroll. The deposits told the story before any witness spoke. $60 from a corner barbershop, $85 from a family restaurant, $150 from Harlem's most famous nightclub. Each payment extracted through badge intimidation, each deposit creating a paper trail that connected extortion to bank account with mathematical precision. Murphy's barbershop had operated that corner for 32 years. cutting hair for everyone from street sweepers to state senators. $60 weekly represented rent money for the old man who had survived the Depression, 2 wars, and countless neighborhood changes. Della's restaurant was a Harlem institution, famous for fried chicken that brought white customers uptown, despite their fear of crossing 125th Street. $85 weekly cut directly into payroll that supported 3 generations of the same family. The Cotton Club, where Duke Ellington once played and tourists still arrived in limousines, paid the highest tribute at $150 every Thursday evening. The total monthly extraction reached $1,400, generating an annual income of $16,800 on top of Torino's official salary of $4,200. The fatal mathematics became clear when Marcus Cross referenced victim lists against Bumpy's protection network. Every business was being taxed twice, once by Bumpy's Organization for Numbers Operation Privileges and Neighborhood Security, once by Torino for fabricated violations and threatened harassment. Torino had inserted himself as a parasite into an established ecosystem, extracting value while providing nothing, keeping 100% of illegal profits instead of offering tribute to the neighborhood's established power structure. It was a violation of sovereignty that historically preceded disappearances into the Hudson River. At 6:15 that evening, witness statements began arriving through Bumpy's network. Each business owner provided identical testimony about amounts, dates, and specific threats. Their fear of retaliation had been overcome by the promise of Bumpy's protection, and their statements carried the synchronized clarity of people finally breaking silence about systematic abuse. At 8:43, a street photographer named James delivered an envelope containing 12 photographs of Torino collecting payments outside various establishments, his patrol car visible in every frame, the exchange of cash captured with courtroom clarity. At 9:30 that evening, Bumpy made his second phone call. Detective Raymond Cole answered immediately, his voice carrying the tension of a man who understood that calls from Bumpy Johnson always preceded someone's world collapsing. I need his partner's name and his precinct captain's weaknesses. Cole delivered within 4 hours. Officer James Murphy was clean but terrified, a good cop held hostage by his corrupt partner. Captain Thomas Brennan had been suppressing complaints against Torino for 8 months, burying 6 formal reports. The reason was simple and terrifying. Michael Torino was the favorite nephew of Deputy Commissioner Francis Torino. The corruption was not isolated rot. It was institutional, protected, and considered untouchable by men who had never encountered Bumpy Johnson's particular brand of systematic destruction. Friday morning, September 16th, 8 o'clock precisely. Bumpy Johnson placed his third phone call with the same mechanical precision he used to calculate numbers odds. Anthony Castellano answered from his social club in Little Italy, where morning espresso was served in china cups and blood debts were honored without question. Castellano owed Bumpy 3 such debts, accumulated over 7 years of territorial negotiations that kept Italian and black criminal enterprises from open warfare. I need evidence that looks like it came from the Genovese family, Bumpy stated without preamble. The request required no explanation, evidence that appeared to originate from them, not evidence that actually did. Castellano understood immediately that someone was being positioned for systematic destruction, and the weapon would be manufactured suspicion of organized crime collaboration. The Nipti and Italian families maintained unwritten agreements about certain neighborhoods, certain operations, certain lines that would never be crossed. Putting a corrupt cop in bed with a major syndicate signaled violations severe enough to trigger institutional retaliation. Marcus Williams executed the financial architecture with surgical precision. Using forged identification documents bearing Torino's name and stolen personal information, he opened a shell bank account at a Queens branch where tellers processed hundreds of transactions without meaningful verification. At 2:30 that afternoon, the account received a wire transfer of $3,500 from a construction company widely recognized as a Genovese front operation. The amount was significant enough to suggest serious corruption, but calculated to avoid immediate federal reporting triggers. Detective Raymond Cole initiated the federal component from an untraceable payphone in Brooklyn. At 4:15, he contacted the FBI Organized Crime Task Force with an anonymous tip about a compromised officer in the 32nd Precinct whose bank records would reveal direct payments from mob-controlled businesses. The tip contained enough verifiable details about the shell account to provoke immediate investigation from agents eager to prosecute police corruption linked to organized crime. Simultaneously, Bumpy's attorney filed formal complaints with Internal Affairs regarding the illegal towing incident. He presented valid registration documents, parking regulations, and witness statements proving the vehicle was legally parked. The complaint demanded immediate investigation into Officer Torino's conduct, creating official documentation that would intersect with federal investigation at precisely calculated moments. The note strategy deployed Friday evening with clockwork brutality. 3 anonymous packages arrived at 3 critical locations through separate courier services that maintained no records. Internal Affairs received the first package. The FBI field office received the second. The New York Amsterdam News received the third. Each package contained identical evidence, photographs of cash exchanges, victim business lists with dates and amounts, and copies of the fabricated bank deposits linking Torino to the mob front company. Inside each package lay a single typed message on plain white paper. Officer 847. 7 months. 12 businesses. 1 neighborhood's patience exhausted. Saturday morning, September 17th, the machinery engaged with terrifying efficiency. At 9:30, FBI agents and nipped Internal Affairs investigators executed a surprise financial audit bypassing Torino's precinct captain entirely. Within 2 hours, they discovered the shell account containing the incriminating $3,500. The evidence appeared irrefutable. Direct wire transfer from a known organized crime front into an account bearing Torino's name and social security number. At 11:47 that morning, Michael Torino was arrested at his Brooklyn home while eating breakfast with his wife and 3 children. Federal agents handcuffed him in his pajamas as neighbors watched from windows. He screamed his innocence, genuinely bewildered by accusations of mob collaboration, unaware the account existed or how money appeared there. Torino had no comprehension of the systematic architecture that destroyed him, watching his world collapse without understanding the enemy he never saw coming. The interrogation room at Federal Plaza carried the institutional smell of fear and disinfectant, where Michael Torino sat handcuffed to a metal table for 6 hours, insisting he had been framed with the desperation of a man watching reality collapse beneath him. Federal agents presented bank statements showing the shell account in his name, wire transfers from Genovese front companies, and photographs of him collecting cash from Harlem businesses. His denials carried no weight against documentation that bore his signature, his social security number, and his physical presence in incriminating photographs. Every time questioning returned to the shell account, he had no explanation. The more he insisted he had no knowledge of the account, the more his denials sounded like rehearsed lies rather than terrified truth. Captain Thomas Brennan executed his survival strategy with institutional precision. Within 24 hours, he provided Internal Affairs with 6 complaint files he had personally buried for 8 months, repositioning himself as a concerned superior officer who had been quietly building a case against Torino but lacked sufficient evidence to move forward. The complaints he once dismissed as unfounded were now rebranded as early warning signs he had diligently preserved. His testimony focused on Torino's recently concerning behavior, carefully protecting his own position while feeding investigators a narrative of one rogue officer contaminating an otherwise clean command. Officer James Murphy cracked under strategic pressure with the predictability of a man who had been carrying moral weight for too long. Faced with the possibility of being painted as an accomplice, he detailed his partner's unexplained cash deposits, expensive purchases that exceeded legitimate income, and increasingly erratic behavior during patrols. Murphy described late-night meetings in alleyways, days when Torino insisted on patrolling specific blocks along Lenox Avenue, and the way he always walked into the same businesses alone, leaving Murphy in the patrol car. His testimony transformed suspicion into confirmation, providing internal corroboration that prosecutors needed to validate external evidence. Monday morning brought coordinated devastation from 12 directions simultaneously. Every black business owner Torino had extorted filed formal complaints with the district attorney's office within a 2-hour window, their timing orchestrated through Bumpy's network with military precision. Murphy's barbershop provided receipts showing forced payments every Friday for 7 months. Della's restaurant submitted ledgers documenting weekly extortion with dates, amounts, and specific threats. The Cotton Club presented testimony from 3 employees who witnessed collections. Each complaint contained identical formatting and overwhelming specificity that created an undeniable pattern of systematic criminal enterprise. Federal prosecutors, convinced they had uncovered genuine mob police corruption, pursued RICO charges carrying 15-year minimum sentences. The wire transfer from the Genovese front company elevated simple extortion into organized crime conspiracy, triggering federal statutes designed to dismantle criminal enterprises. They viewed Torino as a corrupt officer who had sold his badge to facilitate drug operations in Harlem while extracting protection payments from legitimate businesses, completely unaware they were prosecuting a fiction so carefully constructed it had become indistinguishable from truth. Torino's wife, learning about allegations through newspaper coverage detailing mob connections and systematic corruption, discovered financial deception and hidden income from a man she thought she knew. By Monday morning, she filed for divorce, taking their 3 children to her mother's house in Queens. The NYPD moved for immediate termination to contain the scandal, stripping his badge, suspending his pension, and erasing his identity. Tuesday afternoon, September 20th, Torino sat in his car outside the precinct, released on bail, but stripped of everything that defined his existence. In that moment of absolute clarity, he understood this precision destruction could only have originated from one source. He started his engine and drove toward Lenox Avenue. Michael Torino parked his battered Oldsmobile outside the Red Rooster at 2:43 that afternoon, the dashboard clock displaying the exact moment his systematic destruction had commenced 5 days earlier. The symmetry was not coincidental. Everything about his collapse had been engineered with the precision of a demolition expert, calculating the exact placement of charges to bring down a building. He sat in the driver's seat for 18 minutes, his service weapon resting in the glove compartment like a loaded question, calculating whether revenge justified spending whatever remained of his life in a federal penitentiary. The street carried the same rhythm it had maintained for decades. The same heat rising from asphalt, the same smell of fried fish mixing with exhaust fumes, the same pedestrian traffic flowing between barbershops and restaurants. But Torino understood now that he was no longer part of this ecosystem. He had been excised from it with surgical precision, transformed from predator to exile through mathematics he never comprehended until the equations destroyed him. His hand hovered near the glove compartment, weighing scenarios that all concluded with his death or imprisonment, rage burning cold in his chest as he recognized the sophistication of his defeat. Information traveled through Harlem faster than radio waves, carried through a nervous system that predated telephone networks. A shoeshine boy noticed the unfamiliar car. A woman sweeping her stoop recognized the face from newspaper photographs. A waiter glanced through the Red Rooster's window and saw the man whose arrest had become neighborhood legend. Within 3 minutes, the message reached Bumpy Johnson while he finished his afternoon coffee, delivered with the same efficiency that had once warned him of police raids and federal investigations. He did not stand. He did not call for protection. He simply nodded to Marcus Williams, who had been waiting near the kitchen entrance since word arrived. Marcus exited the restaurant alone, unarmed, moving with the measured pace of a man delivering a utility bill rather than confronting a desperate ex-cop with nothing left to lose. He approached the Oldsmobile, wearing a suit that cost more than Torino's former annual salary, stopping exactly 2 feet from the driver's window. Torino watched every step, his training cataloging threat levels and escape routes, his hand still hovering near the weapon that represented his only remaining option for reclaiming dignity through violence. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his voice carrying the temperature of winter air and the authority of absolute certainty. "Mr. Johnson wants you to understand something. You didn't lose your career because you towed his car. You lost it because you'd been stealing from his people for 7 months and thought a badge made you invisible. The car was just the day you made yourself visible. He could have handled this the old way. You'd be floating in the Hudson River with concrete boots and a note pinned to your chest. Instead, he let the system you thought protected you consume you alive. Your own institutions provided the evidence. Your own colleagues testified against you. Your own corruption became the weapon. Consider this mercy. The word hung between them with the weight of a judicial sentence. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. A calculated decision to allow systematic destruction rather than apply immediate brutality. Marcus held Torino's gaze for 3 seconds, long enough to ensure the education penetrated the rage, then stepped back from the vehicle and walked toward the restaurant without checking over his shoulder. He moved with absolute certainty that Torino would do nothing because the mathematics of power had been explained with prosecutorial clarity. Torino sat motionless, processing the terrible equations that defined his new reality. He had been destroyed not by violence, but by his own corruption weaponized against him through institutional channels. Bumpy Johnson had never touched him, never threatened him, never needed to, because he understood systems better than the men who officially controlled them. The realization that his survival was an act of calculated mercy, that he breathed only because Bumpy chose efficiency over brutality, shattered whatever resolve remained in his ruined pride. After 5 minutes of absolute stillness, Torino started the engine and pulled away from Lenox Avenue. He never returned to Harlem. 3 weeks later, facing overwhelming federal evidence and abandoned by the institution he once believed invincible, Michael Torino pleaded guilty to reduced charges, accepting 6 years in prison to avoid 15-year sentences. His uncle, Deputy Commissioner Francis Torino, retired in disgrace following internal investigations that revealed systematic corruption cover-ups. But the story remained incomplete because Bumpy Johnson's 4th phone call, placed late Thursday night while Harlem slept, had never appeared in any official record. The 4th phone call never appeared in federal transcripts or police reports because it represented the weaponization of truth rather than the manipulation of evidence. Thursday, September 15th, 11:52 that evening, Bumpy Johnson dialed James Hicks at the New York Amsterdam News from a payphone outside Marcus Williams' basement office. Hicks answered on the second ring, recognizing the controlled authority in the voice that spoke without introduction. "Mr. Hicks, tomorrow morning you receive a package. Inside, you find the story your readers have been living but never had the power to tell. 12 businesses, 7 months, 1 badge, printed as community courage, not criminal revenge." The package arrived at dawn, unmarked, containing meticulous documentation of Officer Torino's systematic extortion. Victim lists with specific amounts. Murphy's Barbershop, $60 weekly. Della's Restaurant, $85. Cotton Club, $150. Bank deposit records matching exact dates and sums. Photographs showing cash exchanges with patrol car, visible in every frame. But the genius resided in the narrative framework carefully constructed around irrefutable evidence. Bumpy had erased himself completely from the story, transforming 12 victimized business owners into civil rights heroes who courageously organized to expose police corruption through legitimate channels. No mention of numbers operations, territorial disputes, or organized crime connections. The documentation presented ordinary citizens risking retaliation to demand justice, positioning systematic extortion as institutional racism requiring immediate political response. Saturday's front-page headline declared in bold type, "Harlem Businesses Expose Police Corruption Ring." The article detailed 7 months of badge-enabled theft, interviewing victims who spoke courageously about weekly tribute payments and the community solidarity required to challenge police authority. Murphy described cutting family expenses to afford protection payments. Della explained reducing employee wages to satisfy corrupt demands. The Cotton Club manager detailed how systematic extortion threatened neighborhood institutions. Each interview portrayed legitimate businesses standing collectively against institutional abuse. The impact exceeded even Bumpy's calculations. Civil rights organizations seized the documentation as evidence of systematic police misconduct, demanding oversight mechanisms and accountability structures. Within 6 weeks, 6 additional officers across different precincts faced investigation following community complaints, emboldened by the Amsterdam News coverage. Political pressure from black community leaders and civil rights attorneys forced the NIP to establish the first civilian complaint review board, creating independent oversight of police conduct that fundamentally altered law enforcement in black neighborhoods. Bumpy Johnson had achieved perfect strategic victory. Personal revenge transformed into systemic reform while remaining completely invisible throughout the process. He had weaponized legitimate grievances into institutional change, positioning himself as community protector rather than criminal operator, destroying his enemy through mechanisms that appeared entirely separate from his involvement. The business owners became heroes, the system became his weapon, and Bumpy remained a ghost engineering justice. Monday afternoon, Bumpy retrieved his Cadillac Eldorado from Municipal Impound. The clerk, having read newspaper coverage and understanding exactly whose vehicle sat in the yard, waived all fees without request. Official paperwork cited administrative error and departmental apology for improper towing. Bumpy accepted the keys without comment, inspected the obsidian finish for damage, found none, and drove the pristine vehicle back onto Lenox Avenue, where it belonged. As the Cadillac moved through afternoon traffic, this incident crystallized into Harlem legend, a cautionary tale whispered in barbershops and precinct locker rooms about the difference between authority and power. Michael Torino had believed his badge granted him authority over Bumpy Johnson. He learned too late that authority is issued by institutions and revoked by institutions, while power originates from community loyalty and the terrifying patience to let enemies destroy themselves through their own corruption. In the underworld, respect is never demanded through crude violence. It is engineered through precision, cultivated through strategic patience, and demonstrated through systematic destruction that leaves no fingerprints while teaching lessons that echo through generations. Bumpy Johnson was Harlem's greatest engineer. But somewhere in Queens, another man with a badge was about to make Torino's fatal mistake, believing the law protected him from consequences, never suspecting that protection was merely another tool in the wrong man's hands.